I have another question for you. So the question is, what do I do if I believe something different than my pastor has taught? And specifically to drive that home, I have gotten some questions recently. We had Dr. David Campbell here, and he did a podcast with you. It was amazing.
Yes.
It's awesome. He's funny in his own ways. I like that guy. He's a hoot.
Dude, everybody's weird. We're all weird.
I love it.
Everyone's quirky. We're all...
Oh, man. I love it.
Which is a great thing.
Yeah, and then he preached for us, which was phenomenal.
Such a good man.
He just brought the word of God. But I've had some questions. They're like, hey, great. Specifically in the podcast, there's some ways that he interprets Revelation. Specifically, hey, the stuff he says about dispensationalism, like, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
And... so what do I do with the fact that we've heard teaching and my pastor's even given teaching, specifically Andrew, that I don't agree with? What do I do with that? How do I reconcile that? Some people, I'm still working through it. So I'm like, no, unequivocally, I don't agree with that. Like, great.
Yeah.
What would you say to a question like that?
Yeah. I think it goes back to something we've talked about before, which is like, how big of a deal is this thing?
Yes.
And that's the first conversation, I think, to have. And not even just conversation to have. That's the first thing for an individual to think about. That's the first thing I think about whenever I hear whoever say something that I'm like, I don't know if I'm on the same page with that. Right. And so the first question I ask myself is, so what? Right. That's what I ask. When I hear
you ask
whatever,
yourself that.
Big important or influential or awesome pastor, Bible teacher, leader, whoever, says something, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm on the same page with that.
Right.
My first question is, so what?
Right.
So what? Does that matter?
Does it
matter
That's a good question.
Does it matter that me and this person disagree? How big of a deal is this?
Right.
Does it really matter? Does it really matter right now? Does it matter for the thing we're trying to do together? Does it matter even in the grand scope of theology, and what are the main things in the faith? And all that sort of stuff. So that I think we've talked about that fairly, not in depth, but we talked about that in one of these other questions about, what are the national borders, what are the state borders, what are the city borders, and so as you get more narrow in, like there's more. The Apostles' Creed is only 12 things,
right?
But there's like a lot more nuance to where you live in the house that you live in, right? There's more things that make me as an ACO than make me just like a U.S. citizen. Right. That's true. Not all U.S. citizens live in my house. Right. Only as an ACO.
We'll start there. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so that is what it, and that's, I think that's why I'm okay and celebrate the fact that there's tons of local churches, and this might be one of these things that people disagree with. So I don't think denominations are inherently bad, and I think they can be a beautiful thing, and all of that. It's like, I'm glad there's lots of different houses in our neighborhood, and that not every neighborhood's just a commune, Right. Anyways, so let me come back. Okay, so what do I do if I disagree with my pastor? I think the main question is like, is this a big deal? And if you're wondering if it's a big deal, let's talk about it. Right. Let's ask. I think that's a great place to start. Like, hey, Andrew. Right. I think this. You said that. And it's like, cool, okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Not to see who's right. Right. First. That's not where we're starting. It's okay, cool. Like let's kick that around. Right. Because there's kind of not like, there's a lot of things that are really important, but there's like, even as long as that list is, like, most things aren't in or out, make or break types of things. Yes. I'll stop talking and tell me what else we can talk.
That's great. That's great. So
what else?
What I hear you saying is, so we've got to decide, is it important? How much does it matter? And then decide if it matters enough to talk about it, to bring it up, or even if you're wondering if it matters, hey, we'd love to have that conversation. Right. That's what you're specifically saying. Yeah,
because I think it can be, it can feel, what's the word I'm looking for? Ostracizing, maybe to be like, oh gosh,
yes,
I don't think that, and I'd be interested to talk to even on the Revelation stuff. I think that's a fun conversation. One, like I'm a pastor, I like talking about these things, so I kind of want to nerd out on some of it anyways. But the other thing is like I didn't talk very much in that podcast,
right?
And so there might be something that you disagree with David Campbell about that I would say like, well, don't necessarily assume that I think that exact thing.
Sure, yeah,
and there's that, know, and so that's okay. I think David specifically did a great job in the podcast talking about disagreeing well. I agree with everything he said about disagreeing well, and all of that. I did share generally, a few of my own experiences and what I'm learning about how to disagree well, and a lot of it again is around this whole thing of like, how big of a deal is this thing, and again, if anybody's wondering, it's like let's talk about it, and if you're feeling like shoot. And am I still welcome here? Does this, or do we have a problem? Assumptions are really not good.
Right.
You know what they say.
Right.
about when you assume, know, and it's true. And it's true for all of us. And so it's like, let's not do that. Let's talk about it and let's build relationship in that together.
Yes. Yeah. Now that,
because we probably all agree on a lot more than we think about, and we probably all disagree on a lot more than we think about too.
Sure.
At the same way. Like,
Right, and even that podcast you're referring to that we shot, talking about those borders, it's like, gosh, there's a lot that we can disagree on and still have unity and still gather in the name of the Lord together and still thrive together, actually.
Yeah, and I think David did a great job of showing that with Revelation and eschatology, but I think what his comment applies to a lot of theological disagreements. The illustration he gave of the camel.
Yes.
He said like the camel sticks its nose in the tent, and then the next thing you know, the whole thing's in there.
Right.
And like anything that tries to do like that is a problem.
Yeah.
Whether we even agree on it or not. Like I think that let's take dispensationalism versus all the things David Campbell said. Let's get me out of it and put those two things. And his point was he has great friends and teaches students and gives them A's in his class who radically disagree with him.
Right.
Because it's as important as it is and as big as it is, it's not central. And like it's not taking the place of Jesus. It's not taking the place of living a pure life. It's not taking the place of prayer. All of these different types of things. So let's even talk, like, how much does this even work itself out into the whole deal? And so specifically, someone's watching the David Campbell podcast and they're like, I disagree with eschatology. Does Andrew agree with him all the way and all that sort of thing? Like, it's not a main thing that we're talking about. I do have some thoughts on it and stuff like that, but not even really enough to talk tons about it.
Yeah.
I think that, I look at a David Campbell and I say, if you're going to disagree with somebody like David Campbell, which lots of smart people do disagree with him, which is great, like, have a good reason. I think that one of the things that is so valuable about him that I've found is, and just smart people in general, is like, wow, you make a lot of really well-informed, thought-through points.
Yes.
That I should at least value and consider.
Right.
And you've demonstrated to me that even if I disagree with you on the end point, we're both totally still in love with Jesus. And that's awesome. And we might disagree, but you're not dumb.
Right.
And I'm not either. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Because then the jump between the assumption like you are dumb, between that and you're a heretic, you're out, is real. It's a real slippery slope.
So true, bro.
And it's just true. So all of us are like, now in my head, they're in a camp that's out there. Totally. And I'm in here still. And they're like, wait a minute, they just disagreed on something that's not one of those main things. Yeah. And worth talking about in the sense of, no, this is worth making sure we're all on the same page. Then there's these other categories. That's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and so where I want to make sure we land is like, let's talk about these things. This is why you and I have a job as local pastors. Is like, we're here to talk about these things. Right. And have these conversations with anybody, and with our church. And like, yeah. And I think that's something that I'm even noticing, like, anyways, I think we can lose that in kind of our Western Protestant charismatic circle. Right. And it's like, in our circles, like, we don't even, I think as pastors, and then even as
Yes.
church people, like we don't understand that like how much of the purpose of why we even have a job and what makes us pastors is like we want to talk about these things, not to prove points and be right, but like to facilitate these conversations as a community. And so please, like let's talk about more than less.
Yes. No, that's really helpful. So we want to talk about
this.
Yeah,
totally.
Yes, it's a great place to land.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, totally. Thanks.
That's awesome.